And welcome back, everybody, to the Podcaster Nation. That's right. I said welcome back because I know you were just listening to our stuff and you said, man, I want to go back for some more. Folks, we have a lot more for you. We have a great guest today, unbelievably accomplished. I'm going over the notes with this gentleman before the episode, and everything that I'm saying, it's like, okay, we have this many, we have this, we have this. I'm blown away with every single fact that I'm asking him. And he's just like, yep, yep, no problem. You guys are going to love this guy. Folks, this is the podcast that is about podcasters. It's for podcasters. It's done by podcasters. My guest today is a podcaster. You cracked the code. This is the place, folks, where the rising tide raises all ships. So let's get sailing and introduce today's guest, the voice of compliance. And you're going to get to hear all about what that's about. Please welcome Tom Fox. Tom, how you doing?
Great, Roy. Thanks so much. And I really appreciate being here with you today.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it so much. I tell you what, we could start rolling right into your list of accomplishments. But before we do that, tell everybody, who is Tom Fox? What are you about? What brings you here today, brother?
So I'm a lawyer by professional training. My last series of jobs in the corporate world and as a independent lawyer involved corporate legal and regulatory compliance. And I was in the corporate world. Then I had a serious accident and I moved to the um, being a single lawyer focusing on that topic. I Because of the accident I had, I couldn't leave the house except to go to physical therapy. So I
Ouch.
started, this is 2010. So I started utilizing social media, which at that point I knew nothing about Twitter, LinkedIn, etc., Facebook. It's before Instagram. And believe it or not, one time Twitter was a business platform. Um, and I started blogging and I blogged every day. But the podcasting was a natural extension of my blogging. And so I started the first podcast in legal and regulatory compliance in 2012.
Legal and regulatory compliance. Now, I read that when I was looking at your bio, and I heard you just say it again. For those of us who are out there who don't quite know exactly what that means, obviously you're trying to keep people within the rules of the game. Can you give us just a little bit of an idea of what that really means, keeping companies in compliance?
Sure, there is a U.S. law that prevents U.S. companies from engaging in bribery and corruption outside the United States. It's called the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. That was my specialty or subspecialty. Um, that is a multi-billion-dollar industry. If you're not in that space, you've probably never heard of it. By the way you're shaking your head, I think you agree with that.
Absolutely.
I played in that world, but things like export control are very big with this administration. Trade sanctions, that's all compliance. Anti-money laundering, that's all compliance. If we flip over to things like financial investment houses, financial services companies, and banks, those are all heavily regulated and require compliance. Things like data privacy and data protection, that's compliance. Things like Medicare and Medicaid billing, that's compliance. So I play in all of those spaces.
Wow. Okay. And that gives us a better idea of exactly what this field is for those of us who have never heard of it. You were completely right. I think everybody has probably heard of, compliance. I think we get that there are rules that companies have to follow, but I'm not sure anybody can answer you past that. So you've made not only a career out of this, but I mean, you've turned this into sort of a super niche the way that you've gone through it. Tell us about that.
Right. So I did the podcast. I started a couple of other podcasts. And in 2017, I got the bright idea that what we needed in compliance was a one resource for all things compliance in the podcast format. There were three major trade organizations in compliance, two non-for-profit, one for-profit. So I went to all of them and I said, look, let's form this joint venture. We'll do compliance podcasting. It will not take away from anything that you're doing, and will be the one-stop shop for compliance information in the podcast format. And not that I would ever suggest anything anti-competitive. We'll corner all the market on advertising. I could get no interest. The first question was, "What's a podcast?" And after that is, nah, too out there. So I just said, "Bleep it, I'll do it myself." So in 2017, I formed the network. And I had to beg, borrow, steal, pay to get people to start podcasts. I mean, I even had to pay my daughter to start a podcast. Uh, and so I kind of bumped along for a couple of years. And in 2019, I said, look, I either have to fully commit to this or move it to hobby status. And so I fully committed, quit practicing law, and bought all the cool toys, mics and all that. Built this incredibly huge infrastructure. And at the end of the year, I made about $10,000. And I thought, well, that was an interesting experiment. I guess I have to go back to practicing law. So I did that in Q1 of 2020. And then on March 15th, they shut the country down. So that ended sort of all work.
Hmm.
And so I'm sitting around trying to figure out what the heck I'm going to do. And then on or about May 15th of that year, I started getting calls from every product provider in the compliance space. And these are almost all software companies. And they had the same question, which was, how long to get access to your network? And because of the work I had done in 2019, my answer was 24 hours because it was just a
Wow.
drop and drag or a plug and play. And even by that time, I had the largest social media presence in compliance. And my little world exploded. I went from 5,000 a month in income to 35,000 a month in income in 1 month. I went from 60,000 downloads across my network to 250,000 by August of 2020. And since that time, I've just tried to consolidate the growth, explosion of growth that I had at that time.
Wow. I mean, that's so COVID actually helped you,
Yes.
which
So
is
when one of my favorite phrases is when preparation meets opportunity, luck occurs, and I was extraordinarily lucky.
there you go. I mean, that's beautiful. It's exactly what you did. You had it all ready to go when everybody needed it.
Yep.
So okay, I'm dying to find out about how you monetize that kind of thing. Do you mind if we go there just for a minute?
Sure.
Because
So
how do you go to $35,000 a month? It's like, what are you selling? How are you monetizing that? I'm curious.
so the first thing was that all of these companies had a marketing budget, of course. Prior to COVID, all marketing in the compliance world was done in person. Trade shows, conferences, breakfast roundtables, lunches, dinners, etc. So that all that was gone, but all that money was still there. So one, I had people with money to spend. And so I had several offerings that I've kind of refined over the year. And it's about six things now. You can come on my podcast for an appearance fee. You can come on my podcast for an appearance fee and sponsor the podcast. So you get an ad read. You can sponsor an individual podcast series. So I have 50 in the big network. You can sponsor one of those. Um, 2 episodes a month, 4 episodes a month. That's generally about 3,000 a month. I can do so at that time, I got a lot of interest though in branded podcasts. So basically, I would produce, host and produce a podcast for a company because they needed one to spend their marketing dollars and two, they didn't know how to do it. So they asked me to do it. So I picked up five or six of those sort of immediately. All of this, of course, was in the time where there was no work. And literally, I spent 12 hours a day doing podcasts because I had nothing else to do. And so the work that came in, I was able to bring it in and do it. I had the infrastructure, so I could had the get all of that done. So it was just sort of that confluence of events. And then as the year went on, I was able to hire some people to help do the back end work and do the um, content creation of social medias shares because I quickly realized that as important as the podcast is, it is the social media sharing assets created by a podcast that are, if not equal value, close to equal value. So,
Hmm.
audiograms, videograms, tweets, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, all of that evergreen social media sharing material can be used not simply to publicize the podcast, but to publicize the company. And then from my perspective, I everything I do has always been geared to writing a book. So I write about 3 or 4 books a year. And when people go out, how on earth do you do that? Here's how I do it. I used to blog or I still blog every day, but I would, 4 blogs became a white paper. 4 white papers became a chapter. 4 chapters, you've got 100 pages. So it was all one production process. Now take that same concept with a podcast. I get a transcript. That's in addition to a blog post. Now I can create a blog post out of it, but I could use that transcript as a first draft of a something. Once again, whether it's a few pages, whether it's a white paper, whether it's a chapter, whatever it may be. And so that was another deliverable I could give to customers, leading to my top service offering, which was what I call a podcast story, but it's essentially a 5-part podcast series with one general theme, but 5 standalone episodes. It goes out over 5 days for maximum exposure. It's 15 minutes per podcast, and that's by design because I want to talk about 1 or 2 concepts only. But when you put all 5 together, you've got a pretty deep dive into that broader topic. Well, together with that, I create about 12 or 14 assets per podcast for social media sharing. I write a blog from each podcast. I re-edit the blogs into a longer form white paper. And so I give all of that to the client. And that's a very popular offering. And then last year, I had a business coach and he said, well, why don't you do that and write a book? And I thought, well, I'm doing that anyway. I'm just not charging for it. So now I do that same thing and I take a podcast and use that as a basis to write a book or write a book and then use that for a basis of a 10-part podcast series to publicize the book, but I get a sponsor for it. And those are, let me just say, extraordinarily lucrative.
Nice. Nice. What, if you don't mind me asking, what's an example of a sponsor that you got for that sort of thing?
So I wrote a year-end book. I do an annual year-end kind of, the year in review.
Mhm.
I got a company to sponsor that, and they wanted a podcast series out of it. I wrote a book on the use of AI in compliance. I got a company to sponsor that.
Okay.
They weren't interested in the podcast, so I sold the podcast series separately to another company. And so we're in the middle of a 10-part series to publicize my book that somebody else is paying for.
That's great.
It's based on a podcast series.
That's great. In terms of how you find these sponsors and these people who want to step up and sponsor these things, are you going to businesses that are related to the topics of the book? Are you going to referral network of some kind that you know already? Who are you approaching for that type of thing? Again, if you don't mind me asking, feel free to say, "Hey, I'm
Sure.
not going to give you any of the secret sauce, brother."
No, there are no trade secrets in compliance. No, that's the beauty of my nicheness is I know everybody. Everybody knows me. I won Compliance Guy of the Year in 2016. I won pretty much every award there is for writing or podcasting in compliance. So everybody knows who I am. And I mean, I can just email them or call them. Sometimes they call me. What I have not been able to do, and I actually hired either an agent or a salesperson, whatever you call them, want to call them, is to try to break out of the compliance niche to a broader corporate niche
Hmm.
or a broader corporate audience. And so, and that's led to my last sort of cracking the code on on podcasting for monetary generation because it turns out what companies need is nobody has a content creator anymore. They're certainly going to have a CMO and they're, certainly going to talk about that, but they don't have anyone who can actually create the content for them. And that's where as you probably guessed, I'm just a content machine. And I can crank that out and give them content. But it's the podcast, it's an ad read in the podcast, it's a white paper around all of this, it's multiple assets that they can use to not simply publicize a podcast, but a 30-second clip, the video clip they can attach to an email. It's just the creation of social media sharing assets that has become so valuable and very valuable.
I love that. I've never heard it referred to that way, social media assets, but it fits so well. And I don't think 99% of the people out there look at it. They figure, you're creating all this social media and all this content. It's just to get listeners for the podcast, right? Or it's,
Right.
just to grow your brand. And it doesn't even occur to anybody that that's all marketing material that you could sell to somebody.
Yes.
That's brilliant. I love that. So, I mean, how did you come up with that?
Trial and error. Just starting I came up with the idea of the podcast series pre-pandemic, and so I was well suited or well staked on that, and just expanded out to all of these other offerings because the last one I just described to you is this kind of complete package. Two things happened. One is about 2 years ago, I finally cracked the code on numbers for podcasts. So obviously, um, downloads, certifiable downloads is something we all thought we were living with. Well, it turns out that one, that's a meaningless measurement. It's just made up by these guys who think they want to set the standard. But even more important, nobody calls it the same thing. So I may get these names wrong, but it's a listen on Apple. It's a download on Spotify. It's something else on iHeartRadio. If you're on a non-IAB certified platform, it's something completely different, but they're still listening. Now, if you go over to LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, it's engagement, it's an impression, it's a something. Well, a couple of years ago, I finally figured out all of those numbers are available. And it just took me forever to find them, like in LinkedIn or Facebook or YouTube. So I was able to put a coherent set of numbers together that were audible. If somebody wants to audit them, I'm happy to give them the numbers, my accounts to look at them. But the numbers even stunned me. So in 2023, I had about 400,000 IAB certified downloads across the network. I
Wow.
had 7.2 million hits of engagement across that network. And when I put that chart together, that got people's attention because they began to understand, they don't have to listen to the whole podcast, do they? I'm like, no, you got a 60-second clip on LinkedIn, you're getting 5,000 listens. Who do you think they're listening to?
Yeah.
And so it was just sort of that figuring things out as I went along. Um, and so that, and then also finally understanding that these companies need content and they need someone to create content. And if they're in the compliance space, I know compliance better than they do. So I can translate anything they tell me into compliance speak.
Hmm. Okay. I love the way you're packaging this. My background's in sales, and so I'm over here just nodding my head, going, love it," because the packaging makes so much sense, and you're not saying anything that's untrue. You're just letting people know, like, this is the real story that you don't get with just the word download, which
Right.
hates.
And the reason, so when I started the network, I knew legal and regulatory compliance was never going to be the next Joe Rogan or Mark Marion or any of those guys. But my thought, and back in sort of 2017, 2018, the magic number was 30,000 downloads a month. Well, I knew I'd never get that. But I thought, well, what if I had 10 podcasts that would get 3,000 each? And so, because I was so niche, I decided to go down that route. And then I discovered the meaninglessness of an IAB certified download, and even more meaningless that you're going to get $25,000 for every 1,000 IAB certified downloads. And so I completely won't even discuss that with anyone.
That's I love that. That's beautiful. I do some podcast coaching, and one of the first things that I tell people is exactly what you're backing up everything I've been telling my folks. So I love this. I'm going to refer your podcast to this interview to everybody that I've spoken to because you're backing it all up. Everybody feels like they come in and they go, "Oh, I got to get downloads. I got to get downloads. I got to get advertising," and they're worried about getting 10,000 downloads so they can get a 30-second clip that's pre-recorded that's going to pay them 18 cents.
Yeah,
And people just don't understand where the real money is. And you cracked that code. I mean, this is years ago you did this.
it's years ago, but the whole sort of package of put together for, six figures, I didn't figure that out until this year.
Oh, okay.
So
All right.
now I can sell one podcast for six figures, and once I get to about three or four of those, that's all I have to do.
There you go. That's it. That's a good day. All right. Let me back up a little bit because you made the statement about, well, what if I had 10 podcasts, that had 3,000 downloads each? Love the thinking there. That's out of the box. How can I put these numbers together in a different way? But they're all your podcasts. And so you've got a network, so to speak, of podcasts that are that are all yours in some capacity. We talked about this a little in the pre-interview. You produce them or you own a part of them. Can you explain to everybody kind of how you put together this network of podcasts, where that came from, and what that's about?
Sure. So I have one switch, it's on and off. I don't have a dimmer. And when I get an idea, I start a new podcast. So, Star Trek in compliance, Star Wars in compliance, sports in compliance, Winnie the Pooh in compliance, everything compliance, great women in compliance, daily compliance, weekly compliance, compliance tip of the day, data privacy and compliance. Um, let's see, the ones I've started in the past month, AI in compliance. I'm getting ready to start an AI tools in compliance. I met a woman that I had great chemistry with, and we're going to start a podcast just because the chemistry was so good. So I just start these podcasts and are great people in compliance, chief compliance officers. I just unending amount. I did James Joyce in compliance, Kafka in compliance, Dante in compliance. Uh, I'm in the middle. Every summer I do Star Trek, the original series in compliance called Trekking Through Compliance. So I'm in the middle. I started that on June 1. So I'm having to update that this year. And as my wife said, this is really just an excuse to rewatch every episode, isn't it? And I'm like, well, yeah. And I'm in the middle of or towards the end of a Sherlock Holmes in compliance where I did a podcast on every one of the 56 short stories, and now I'm on two of four novels. And I'm trying to decide if I'm going to go deep dive into the movies next. So,
Wow. Okay, so for instance, because I'm a Trekkie too, so let's focus on that one. You're doing Star Trek in compliance,
right.
okay, the original series. So is the in compliance just to keep the category name going? I mean, there's no actual compliance for Starfleet, so
Oh, that's where
you know.
you're wrong. Wrong,
Oh
wrong,
my
wrong,
goodness,
wrong.
you're doing compliance lore.
I'm doing compliance lessons from Star Trek. So let me take tomorrow's episode because I just wrote the blog on it.
Okay,
The Enemy Within. That's the one where Kirk gets split in the transporter accident.
okay,
And he attacks Yeoman Janice Rand. Uh, and pretty clear he rapes her, or at least tries to rape her. Of course, that's not shown on camera or anything. And she scratches him across the face. Well, McCoy and Spock try and interview her about what happened. And she keeps crying. He's the captain. He's the captain. I have to do what the captain says. And they don't
wow,
know how to have empathy for a woman who's been the victim of a sexual assault. So I use that episode to talk about harassment at the workplace and how when someone reports harassment, you can't just sit down and say, just give me the facts, ma'am. Where did he touch you? When did he touch you? Why did you let this happen, basically? Which, you're going to get anyone who reports, whether it's to the police or a whistleblower, to shut down. So just things like that. They're lessons in every episode. leadership, compliance, ethics, investigations, all training, all of those sorts of things.
I mean, that's beyond creative. So, congratulations on that too. I mean, you've taken this to a level that I'm only starting to understand, I think. So, you're taking today's rules of compliance in industry and business and in corporations, that type of thing. You're applying them to all of these different subject matters, different books, different TV shows, and you're picking out a lesson
Right,
from each and putting it out that way. And you're doing it in a creative way. And that's making all of these different podcasts, which is producing all of this different content, which is giving you downloads and views and value to then turn around and market.
right.
I, you know, because wow, that is brilliant to put it together like that. My next question, of course, again, being a sales guy, is you said you recently brought in a sales guy of some kind or some sort of team or a service. Have you been up until now selling all this stuff yourself on top of making all of the content?
Yeah.
Well, okay, when, how? I mean, that's a full-time job right there because you've got let's hit everybody with some numbers. Okay. I've been holding these back because I didn't want to knock anybody over, but you've got between 60 to 70 podcasts on one of your networks. And is that the Compliance Podcast Network?
It's actually across both networks. The Compliance Podcast Network, I think I have 50, and I have 10 or 15 on the second network.
Okay. And I apologize for getting the numbers a little askew, but they're so huge that I think I'm still trying to wrap my head around them. Um, okay. So you've got two different networks on two different topics. You've got all of these podcasts, somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 to 70 total. You've written how many different books at this point?
Since 2010, 38.
38 books. Okay. So you've done all of this. And then on top of that, and on top of producing, how many podcasts are you hosting right now where you're actually doing what I'm doing right now and sitting here and hosting the episode?
60.
You- I mean, I'm sorry. I'm sitting here thinking I'm busy today because I have 8 interviews. You're putting out 60 podcasts and on top of all of this, okay, on top of winning awards and everything else you're doing, you have time to go sell?
Well, um, years ago, I worked for a company, and their sales philosophy is we will answer the phone if you call us. And that sort of inured to me. And so I will answer the phone if you call me. And then I learned, oh, I have to put some materials together. And, so I'm a lawyer, so I can write. So I wrote out stuff. And now I have a team that uses Canva to create this really cool graphics and marketing material. And then a sales guy who actually knows what he's doing.
And that's not that easy to find these days either. So congratulations. As a former sales guy. Okay, wow. So you built this all yourself though, really. And now
Right.
you're expanding out and you're bringing in team members. When in this process did you make the decision that I need to start bringing in help? I need to bring in other people for different tasks, like sales, like some of these other
It,
tasks.
it was in the summer of 2020 during the pandemic, and I was spending literally 4 to 6 hours a day creating the social media shares. And that was one of the things that led to that huge spike in numbers that I had that year was I just decided I was going to hammer social media, a minimum of 3 tweets a day, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. I'm not a TikTok guy, so I don't go there. But and I realized as we started to move out of the pandemic, I couldn't continue. If I was going to do any other work, I couldn't continue to spend 4 to 6 hours a day just doing social media. That seemed to me to be the lowest hanging fruit, and I got to outsource or resource outside the United States who could do that.
Hmm.
And now I have a
Okay.
team that does that.
Wonderful. So the social media was the first thing that you started to kind of outsource?
Yes,
Okay. Based on the time and the effort that it took.
right.
Right. Makes sense. Okay. Excellent. Beautiful. The Now we've talked about your compliance podcast network. You've got another network, the Texas um, Hill Country Podcast Network.
Right.
Tell me about that and where that came from.
Sure. So in 2021, my wife and I moved to a part of Texas called the Hill Country, which is just that, hills. Not too many hills in Texas. And so when I got here, there were no podcasts. And unfortunately, I fumbled after around and two people started podcasts. So I have the third one in the Hill Country and called the Hill Country Podcast. And one day, I met a guy who has a Facebook news show. It's like a daily news show, except it's on Facebook. And he said, "Oh, I've got these other two guys who want to start a network. And you know about running networks. Why don't you guys get together?" So we did. And these other two guys told me they had this idea. They wanted to start a Hill Country Podcast Network. And I looked at them and I said, the only thing I'm pissed off about is that I didn't think of this because in so it's a rural part of West Texas, and most
Yeah.
rural focused podcast networks have a very big anchor show, hunting, fishing, gardening, winery, whatever it may be, and that's the anchor, and everything else kind of feeds off that. I didn't think we would get that big. Once again, that I don't think in terms of the really big podcast, but I live in a town of 25 or near a town of 25,000 people, 3 day a week newspaper, internet radio, so no local radio, no television, and they were starved for content. And this guy with his Facebook, essentially daily radio show, he just ran it on Facebook. He was getting great numbers, and my county is 38% over the age of 65, and they're all on Facebook. So I knew if I posted on Facebook, I'd get an audience. Well, that's what we did. And part two of that equation, though, was no businesses in town were doing social media marketing. They were trying to sell through the newspaper or advertise in San Antonio, which is the closest town. It's about an hour away, but that was a complete crapshoot. And and I knew what I'd looked into advertising in the newspaper. I knew what the price was, and I knew I could produce an episode cheaper. So we came in with a package of two podcasts a month for $400 and creating, once again, just creating what I'd already created in the Compliance Podcast Network, but trying to get these business people to understand your audience is on Facebook. Why not be on Facebook talking to them as a thought leader? And they'd never really thought about that. Well, pretty quickly, we now have as many subscribers as newspaper subscriptions in town. So with our network, I try to focus on sort of the human interest stories. So businesses, authors, artists, songwriters, movie producers, um, those sorts of podcasts. We've got a couple of financial advisors who have financial advising podcasts. We've got some other businesses. Um, and so we have this sort of small niche little um, group of podcasts, and I'm trying to just continually show these people, or I'm a member of Rotary. So I started a Rotary podcast, and they were like, "Oh my God, it's a podcast for Rotary." It's like revolutionary. Uh, and and we won a Gold Communicators Award for it. So
Nice.
yeah,
Congrats. That's cool.
yeah, it is. And so there's just such an opportunity here because once again, the market's here.
I just love the way you tell the story too. So, we didn't have I joined the Kiwanis and or a Rotary, and we didn't have a Rotary podcast. So of course I started one and I added it to the network. Um, I, I love your attitude. I love the way that it's more of a, well, why not? It's not why. It's not what's the issue is going to be. It's just, well, why not? We don't have one. Let's try it. Have you had any podcasts where you've had that kind of impulse and said, you know what? We don't have one of these, so let's make a podcast where it hasn't worked? Or are you just like Midas touching the gold and everything you try works?
Let me change that question just a little bit because what I'm going to say will encompass that.
Okay.
And the question I get is, Tell us your top five mistakes you made podcasting.
Okay.
I'm like, that's easy because it's one, but I'm going to save that to the end. I've never made a mistake podcasting. And the reason is I've learned from everything I've done. So if a podcast doesn't work out, it's not a mistake. I look at it as a learning experience. Either I lost interest in it, or it turns out I couldn't get enough people to be interested in coming on as guests. I used to have a podcast for chief compliance officer called The Compliance Life. And I thought it was great, but audience didn't think it was that great. So I was like, okay, I'll move on to something else. So now the mistake is every podcaster has made this mistake, but we make it once. And that mistake is don't hit the record button. And once you fail to hit the record button once, you will never not hit the record button again. One time I flew up to Boston to interview a Harvard professor. I was so excited. He was great. An hour and a half. And we finished up, and I looked down. And I went, why is the red button dark? And he thought I was an idiot. And he was right. But I learned always make sure the record button's on. I just, whatever I've done, I've learned from it. You know, if it worked or didn't work, or if I need to do something different. Someone told me even this last month, I'll keep my notes kind of down below. And when I need to refer to my notes, I look down and someone said, "You're looking down too much. It's distracting." And no one had ever told me that before. And that's because I keep my notes below because I don't have a teleprompter and I don't know how to do a double screen of my notes contemporaneously with the picture. So I'm going to have to figure out how to do that. But, it's all learning.
Nice. I like the way you rephrased the question. I was just curious, yeah, because you seem to be having all kinds of success, and I mean, some people do have the Midas touch. They just kind of have it figured out. They figured out their niche. They're going to keep going. It really seems like you have done that, and so congratulations, with what you're doing. Um, I'm assuming at this point that the goal is to continue to build, continue to add more shows, continue to grow, or is there a different end game in mind for Tom Fox and the networks?
Well, I mean, at some point, I'd like to cash out on all this, but I'm in no hurry to do that.
Good deal. So you're loving what you're doing at this point, even with all the
Absolutely.
shows.
I talk to the smartest people in compliance every day, all day. And it's not that I can see around corners, but I talk to people who can see around corners. And because I talk to all of those people, I can put all of those points together. So it seems like I'm the guy when I'm just talking to everybody.
That's beautiful. You may have just answered the question that I usually ask, but it's kind of my Arnold Schwarzenegger "I'll be back" thing. I just like to get it in there. Let me ask you, what is the thing about doing all these podcasts and platforms and everything else that you do that you love the most? And what is the thing that you do with everything that you're doing that you just really and truly dislike the most, would love to just throw it out the window and never have to deal with it again?
So, what I love the most is I'm intensely curious. I was always a voracious reader, and I found that I can consume more information in the audio format. So, I talk to people all day long about things I love and things that they're passionate about. I have two requirements and two requirements only for a successful podcast. Number one, how much did I learn? Number two, how much fun did I have? And that's it. And I always learn something. I may be the guy, but I always learn something from a podcast. And then if I have fun like I have here, and like you're having fun, it communicates in your voice, and people will appreciate a host who is engaged in having fun.
That's awesome. I appreciate that too. So thanks. All right. No, now you got to give it up though. Now, what is the thing that you just really, man, you'd love to throw right out the window?
So um, I get up very early in the morning and I work 12 to 15 hours every day. But I feel like two things. So I played high school athletics, so I still have all these stupid tapes playing in my head. One of which is you got to earn it every day. And at 68 years old, I feel like I got to earn it every day. So that's one thing. But the second thing is I, I have a lot of repeat guests. I have a lot of friends, but I have a lot of first timers. And I can roll in and look at a set of outline for 30 seconds and roll through a podcast, but this may be, the only time they ever do a podcast. So I feel like I owe it to them to be on time, to be prepared, to be engaged, because otherwise I'm not being fair to the people I'm interviewing. So I just, even when I'm dragging my ass out of bed at 4:30 or 5 every morning to get ready, I'm like, nope, well, I've committed to this and I'm going to do it to the best of my ability and I have to earn it every day.
So you're still going through the grind even after all these years and all the success.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Well, I mean, you definitely have earned it. So I love it. Listen, I appreciate everything you've brought on here. I don't get to go through a podcast very often where I didn't even start, I stopped taking notes because I'm like, I'm just going to rewatch this one and take notes on my own time. Where I can sit back and go, man, I learned a ton. And there are a zillion great ideas in here for, me and all kinds of other podcasters. So I appreciate you bringing that today because it makes it kind of a special episode just for me. And I am enjoying myself. I'm loving listening to this. Let me ask, and as we kind of draw things together and wrap them up a little bit, what is your best piece of advice for the at home indie podcaster who's nowhere near where you are obviously, but who really is just trying to kind of get going, who wants to make it, wants to stick around, and wants to be thinking about some of these things like maybe I can monetize one day. What's your best piece of advice for them?
Well, if you haven't started a podcast, my advice is get off your duff and start. That's it. Quit making excuses. Just do it. Don't say, oh, what mic do I buy? Shut up. Go buy a mic. Go buy a Blue Yeti, whatever it is. Go to Amazon. You can get a mic. But it's just start. And then I think there are 5 reasons to have a podcast: thought leadership, content creation, audience engagement, relationship development, and one other one I just forgot. Figure out which one of those you want to do. And they're not mutually exclusive, but you can tailor your podcast to one or more of those. If you want to own your space, whatever your space is, do the following: start a daily news podcast, because that's when that's when I figured out that's how I own this space. I met a guy, or I knew a guy, and he did Indiana basketball, and he broke down Indiana basketball games. Well, then he started an Indiana basketball daily news podcast. I'm like, who's ever going to listen to that except people from Indiana? Well, it turns out he has huge advertisers in Indiana for that because his audience is so passionate. And so I started a daily compliance news podcast. And the guy asked me one in a podcast conference, he said, well, I have a podcast on PTSD. I said, perfect. The daily PTSD news for veterans podcast, or whatever you want to call it, because I know that there's a veteran in the news every day with struggling with that issue. And if you could talk about those issues, you're going to own that space. And so if you want to own your space, just do a daily news. And now I know you're going to say, well, how much time does that take? Well, when I started, it took an hour. Now it's 15 minutes because I do 4 curated stories. And then if we can take it another level, this completely amazes me. So it's 4 stories a day, 5 days a week, 20 stories a week. I take 10 of those stories, and on Saturday, I do them as 10 for 10, 10 top compliance stories for the week. I get better numbers on 10 for 10 than I do on my daily compliance news podcast.
Oh my gosh.
So repurpose everything.
I love that idea too, the daily news thing. And here in Indiana, we do really love our basketball. I'm not sure if you even knew I was in Indiana, but
No, I didn't.
normally I have my IU cup sitting right here, but it's in the dishwasher, so I have my
Well, if you
backup.
look real close, you'll see a U of M helmet behind me.
Oh my goodness. All right. I see it. I see that Wolverine helmet over there. Oh, good for you. I love it. Is that where you went?
Yeah.
Or are you just a fan?
No, went there.
Went there. Congratulations. That's fantastic.
So
It's
yeah, and this, I mean, it started that other guy. He was three of his buddies, and they listened to every game they couldn't see on television, and they two of them were in Texas, and they'd listen to it on the radio, and they would literally break down every game. And then he got this other idea, and I thought that's absolutely brilliant.
how long are your daily news podcasts usually? I mean, is it a 10, 15 minute thing on just one
Four to
story or
five
is it
minutes.
it's 45 minutes?
Yeah.
You're putting out like long form content, like that on four different areas daily?
Well, it's I would call it short form content because it's less than 5 minutes for the whole podcast. So I have three daily podcasts. I have daily compliance news. I have compliance tip of the day. Those are both about 5 minutes. And for the summer, I have the Star Trek series, which is closer to 10 to 15 minutes.
Oh, I see. I thought you were telling me each one of those was 45 minutes, like each.
No, no.
Okay. And I'm just, again, I'm sitting there and the amount of minutes in the day is just trickling away in
Yeah.
front of me. And I'm going, how? I mean, so at some point it's like, do you really have more hours in your day than everybody else? Because how are you getting this done? But that's amazing. I love that idea. That's great. That's really beautiful. I tell you what, you've had so much to throw out here, and something tells me you've got at least one more thing in there. So let me kind of end with this. And I didn't warn you about this, so I'm trusting that you're going to be able to handle this curveball. Is there anything that I didn't ask you? Is there anything that maybe we talked about and you want to drive home a little harder for our audience, which are mostly podcasters? Or is there anything that, maybe just one more leave behind, something that you've been sitting on that we didn't touch on that you know is going to help everybody else? I'm going to give you the floor for the last minute here and go for it.
Never be afraid to ask for money. And I say that as someone who is afraid to ask for money for years. And the best example I can give you is this podcast appearance fee. I charge $500 to come on a podcast. And my wife beat on me for years to do that. And I said, oh, no one will ever do that. I'll never get any podcasts. No one will do that. No one pays for that. And so I remember it was a September. I can't remember which year I instituted that. And I started off at $100. Well, 2 months later, I raised it to $250. Nobody blinked. At the start of the new year, I raised it to $500. Nobody blinked. The end of that quarter, the first year, I raised it to $1,000. People started blinking. I'm like, okay, I've hit the pain point. So I kicked it back to 500, and I've never changed it since then. And nothing wrong with having two, three, $4,000 a month in income coming in for something that you're already doing. But you're not going to get it unless you ask. And you are providing a service. Don't ever think somebody's doing you a favor to come on your podcast. Maybe, but you're doing them a favor, particularly if you're delivering to them social media sharing assets and this whole package of things that I put out as well. So don't be afraid to ask for money.
Wow. See, I knew you had one more in you that you were just waiting on. You just went right to it. I love it. Absolutely love it. Tom Fox, the the voice of compliance. Tom, I can't thank you enough for coming on here and talking about all this stuff that, frankly, most of my listeners have never heard about before. You've been great.
Roy, this has been way too much fun. Congratulations on the Pacers. And I've really enjoyed my time with you. And I hope we can continue this conversation. And you're going to have to come on one of my pods now.
Oh, anytime. Although I may need a little while to come up with $500.
I'm going to give you the friends and family rate.
All right. Listen, I appreciate you. Thank you, sir. All right, folks, that's been, like I said, the voice of compliance, Tom Fox, with so much. If you didn't take something out of this podcast, folks, that's going to help you and grow your business and your podcast, then you weren't paying attention. You know what? Go back, re-listen to it again. Have a notebook next to you. This is the podcast. It's done by podcasters. It's for podcasters. It's about podcasters. And folks, as we demonstrated here today in huge form, this is the place where the rising tide truly raises all ships. So keep sailing.